Hello and welcome. Tonight we're discussing something that affects every single one of us, but few dare to address directly. The uncomfortable truth that capitalism, the economic system that built America's prosperity, has been hijacked right before our eyes. Before we dive in, I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop a comment below telling me your city or state. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps us reach more Americans who need to hear these truths in an age of widespread deception. What we're experiencing isn't true free market capitalism anymore. It's a distorted, manipulated system that serves the few while claiming to work for all. The elites have pulled off perhaps the greatest sleight of hand in economic history, maintaining the language and appearance of capitalism while gutting its core principles. Real capitalism is about competition, innovation, and freedom. It rewards hard work and creates broad prosperity. But what we have today is increasingly a system where connected insiders make the rules, rig the game, and privatize profits while socializing losses. The average American family is working harder than ever but feeling increasingly desperate. Meanwhile, a small handful at the top are accumulating unprecedented wealth and power. This isn't happening by accident. It's by design. Tonight, we'll explore how this hijacking happened, who's behind it, and what it means for your future and your children's future. Most importantly, we'll discuss what can be done to take back our economic system before it's too late. Stay with me. This might be the most important conversation about economics you'll hear this year. 50 years ago, this street would have been bustling with locally owned businesses. The hardware store owner knew your name. The restaurant owner coached your kids' baseball team. The profits from these businesses stayed in the community, creating a virtuous cycle of local prosperity. Today, we see shuttered storefronts or corporate chains that funnel profits to distant shareholders and executives who've never set foot in this town. This transformation didn't just happen. It was engineered through policy choices made by both political parties. In the 1980s and 90s, we were told that globalization and financialization would create unprecedented prosperity. What actually happened? Millions of American manufacturing jobs disappeared overseas. Towns like this one hollowed out. Wall Street boomed while Main Street withered. The financial sector, which once existed to support productive businesses, morphed into something else entirely. Today, it often extracts value rather than creates it. Complex financial instruments generate billions in profits without producing anything tangible. Meanwhile, small businesses struggle to get loans. Here's what's remarkable. None of this was inevitable. It was the result of specific policy choices, trade deals that prioritized cheap goods over American jobs, tax policies that favored financial engineering over manufacturing, regulatory changes that accelerated corporate consolidation. Both parties sold us this vision. Republicans claimed it was free market capitalism. Democrats called it progress and modernization. But for millions of ordinary Americans, it has meant declining opportunities, stagnant wages, and diminished hope. The hijacking of capitalism began with the divorce between the financial economy and the real economy, where actual goods and services are produced. In our next segment, we'll examine how a small group of global elites orchestrated this separation and why they fought so hard to make it happen. Who benefits from an economic system where wealth flows increasingly to those who move money rather than make things? Let's look at the architects of our current situation. In the aftermath of the Cold War, a transnational elite class emerged. These weren't just wealthy individuals. They were people who increasingly viewed national boundaries as irrelevant to their interests. Former Reagan budget director David Stockman calls them the Party of Davos, referring to the Swiss resort town where global elites gather annually to plan our future. This new elite operates through a network of institutions: central banks, multilateral organizations like the IMF and World Bank, global corporations, non-governmental organizations, and influential think tanks. Together, they've promoted an agenda of unfettered capital mobility, reduced labor protections, and centralization of economic decision-making. The irony is remarkable. While claiming to champion free markets, these elites have created one of the most managed economies in history. The Federal Reserve manipulates interest rates to benefit financial assets owned predominantly by the wealthy. Regulatory agencies are captured by the very industries they're supposed to oversee. Government bailouts protect big players from the consequences of their risky behavior. Consider what happened in 2008. When Wall Street's reckless speculation threatened to collapse the financial system, taxpayers were forced to foot the bill. Not a single major banker went to jail. Instead, the architects of the crisis received bonuses while millions of Americans lost their homes. This wasn't capitalism, it was socialism for the rich. Risk was nationalized while profit remained privatized. And in the years since, this pattern has only intensified. The global architects of this system speak the language of markets and competition, but their actions reveal a preference for monopoly, cartel, and control. They don't want a level playing field, they want to own the field and write the rules of the game. In our next segment, we'll examine how technology has been weaponized to further consolidate their power and control over your daily life. The smartphone in your pocket is more powerful than the computers that sent astronauts to the moon. But it's also the most sophisticated surveillance device ever created. And increasingly, it's being used to monitor, influence, and control your behavior in ways you might not even recognize. Technology could have been a great democratizing force, giving individuals more freedom and autonomy. Instead, it's become a means of unprecedented centralization. A handful of tech monopolies now have more power over your daily life than any government. These companies know what you buy, where you go, who you talk to, what you believe, even what you might do next. They claim this data collection improves your experience. What they don't mention is how it allows them to manipulate your choices and monetize your attention. But the technological leash extends far beyond social media. The push toward a cashless society gives financial institutions and government the ability to track every transaction you make, and potentially deny you access to your own money if you fall out of favor. The integration of artificial intelligence into financial systems means algorithms, not humans, increasingly decide who gets loans, insurance, or employment opportunities. These systems operate as black boxes, their decision-making processes hidden from public scrutiny. Meanwhile, China has pioneered a social credit system that rewards good behavior and punishes bad behavior as defined by the ruling party. Western elites speak of this system not with horror but with envy. They're already implementing similar systems through corporate policies and public-private partnerships. The hijacked version of capitalism uses technology not to expand human freedom, but to constrain it within parameters acceptable to the ruling class. Your choices appear diverse on the surface, hundreds of streaming options, countless products to buy, but fundamental choices about how society operates are increasingly removed from democratic processes. Technology should serve humanity, not enslave it. In our next segment, we'll look at how the capture of our educational institutions has prevented many Americans from recognizing their own economic imprisonment. How do you convince people to accept a system that works against their interests? You control what they're taught to believe from childhood through early adulthood. Our educational institutions, from elementary schools to elite universities, have been thoroughly captured by the same global elite that hijacked our economic system. They're no longer teaching critical thinking, but rather indoctrinating students with a worldview that serves power. Economic education is particularly revealing. Students are taught that globalization and financialization are inevitable, natural developments rather than policy choices that benefit specific interests. Alternative economic approaches are dismissed as unrealistic or dangerous, narrowing the boundaries of acceptable debate. Meanwhile, the cost of college education has skyrocketed, forcing millions of young Americans to begin their adult lives burdened by debt. This debt functions as a form of control. When you owe hundreds of thousands of dollars, you're less likely to take risks or challenge the system. You need that corporate job, however soul-crushing it might be. Elite universities function as gatekeepers, determining who gains access to positions of influence in government, media, and business. Admission increasingly depends on wealth and connections, creating a self-perpetuating aristocracy that talks about meritocracy while practicing nepotism. The result is a professional managerial class that speaks the language of social justice while advancing policies that entrench economic inequality. They've been taught to focus on cultural issues rather than questioning the economic order that provides their privileges. This intellectual capture extends beyond formal education. Legacy media organizations, think tanks, and cultural institutions amplify approved perspectives while marginalizing dissent. Try questioning globalization or central banking policies in these spaces and watch how quickly you're dismissed as ignorant or dangerous. True capitalism requires an informed citizenry capable of critical thinking and meaningful dissent. The hijackers of capitalism understand this, which is why they've invested so heavily in controlling what Americans are allowed to think and say. In our next segment, we'll examine how the deliberate erosion of communities and family life has further enabled the economic takeover we're experiencing. Humans evolved to live in communities. We're social creatures who find meaning and security through lasting bonds with family, friends, and neighbors. Strong communities create resilience against hardship and provide natural resistance against centralized control. The architects of hijacked capitalism understand this. That's why they've systematically undermined the institutions that once bound Americans together. Family formation has been made increasingly difficult through economic pressures. Young adults struggle with stagnant wages, rising housing costs, and student debt, delaying or preventing marriage and children. When both parents must work full-time simply to afford housing, family life suffers. Religious participation, once the cornerstone of community life for most Americans, has plummeted. Regardless of your personal beliefs, the decline of religious institutions has eliminated crucial community bonds and support systems that people relied on for generations. Local civic organizations that once connected people across class lines have withered. The bowling leagues, Rotary clubs, and community groups that political scientist Robert Putnam documented in his book, Bowling Alone, have largely disappeared, leaving people isolated and disengaged from civic life. Even physical spaces have been redesigned to minimize human connection. Traditional neighborhoods with front porches where neighbors interacted have been replaced by subdivisions with massive garage doors and backyard privacy fences. Public spaces have been privatized or allowed to deteriorate. The result is an atomized population of consumers rather than citizens, individuals who seek meaning through consumption rather than contribution, who face economic and social challenges without community support, who are easier to manipulate and control. This atomization isn't accidental. Isolated individuals are more dependent on corporations and government, more susceptible to manipulation through media, and less likely to organize for their collective interests. True capitalism has always been balanced by strong social institutions that moderate its excesses and distribute its benefits. By weakening these institutions, the hijackers have created a distorted system that maximizes extraction while minimizing resistance. In our next segment, we'll explore how manufactured scarcity in housing and healthcare has further entrenched the power of the new economic elite. America is an enormously wealthy country with abundant natural resources. We have more land, energy, and productive capacity than almost any nation on Earth. Yet millions of Americans struggle to afford basic necessities like housing and healthcare. This isn't the result of natural scarcity. It's artificially created through policy choices that benefit the few at the expense of the many. Let's start with housing. In 1970, the median home price was about twice the median annual income. Today, it's over 5 times median income in many areas, and far worse in coastal cities. This didn't happen naturally. Restrictive zoning laws, many championed by wealthy homeowners to protect their property values, have prevented new construction. Foreign investors parking their money in American real estate have turned housing into a speculative asset class rather than a place to live. Government policies have subsidized investors over first-time homebuyers. The Federal Reserve's policy of keeping interest rates artificially low for over a decade inflated asset prices, including housing, benefiting those who already owned assets while making it harder for young Americans to get on the property ladder. This wasn't capitalism, it was policy-driven asset inflation. Healthcare follows a similar pattern. Americans pay more for healthcare than citizens of any other developed nation, yet our outcomes are often worse. Hospital consolidation has eliminated competition in many regions. Patent laws allow pharmaceutical companies to charge astronomical prices for drugs that cost pennies to produce. Administrative bloat adds enormous costs without improving care. The common thread is clear. In sector after sector, policies are enacted that create artificial scarcity, driving up prices and concentrating wealth and power. Real capitalism would produce the opposite result, increasing supply, lowering prices, and distributing benefits widely. But perhaps the most critical manufactured scarcity is in opportunity itself. As economic mobility declines and the middle class hollows out, the American dream becomes increasingly out of reach for ordinary citizens. In our next segment, we'll examine how the corruption of our monetary system has enabled much of this hijacking and what it means for your financial future. Few Americans understand how our monetary system actually works. This ignorance isn't accidental, it's by design. Because if more people understood how money is created and manipulated, they might demand fundamental changes. In 1971, President Nixon ended the convertibility of dollars to gold, completing America's transition to a purely fiat currency, money backed by nothing but government decree. This removed the last constraint on money creation and began an unprecedented experiment in monetary history. Since then, the Federal Reserve has dramatically expanded the money supply, particularly in response to economic crises. After the 2008 financial crisis, and again during the COVID pandemic, trillions of new dollars were created out of thin air through a process called quantitative easing. This new money doesn't flow evenly throughout the economy. It enters through financial institutions and benefits those closest to the spigot, primarily Wall Street banks and their wealthy clients. By the time this money reaches ordinary Americans, if it ever does, asset prices have already been inflated and purchasing power has been eroded. The result is a form of hidden taxation. Your dollars buy less while the assets owned predominantly by the wealthy increase in nominal value. This isn't market capitalism. It's monetary manipulation that systematically transfers wealth upward. Central banks claim these policies prevent economic collapse and benefit everyone. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Since the Federal Reserve's founding in 1913, the dollar has lost over 96% of its purchasing power. Meanwhile, economic instability has increased rather than decreased, with boom-bust cycles becoming more extreme. The money illusion extends to government debt. Both parties now embrace endless deficit spending, knowing that central banks will purchase government bonds to keep interest rates artificially low. This arrangement allows politicians to spend without raising taxes directly, passing the cost to future generations through inflation and debt. A true capitalist system requires sound money that serves as an honest measure of value and store of wealth. Without it, market signals become distorted, resources are misallocated, and those with political connections can extract wealth without creating value. In our next segment, we'll look at how the corruption of language itself has made it difficult for Americans to even discuss these problems honestly. George Orwell understood that controlling language means controlling thought. If you can limit the vocabulary people have access to, you can limit what ideas they can express or even conceive. The hijackers of capitalism have waged a sustained attack on language itself, twisting words until they mean the opposite of their original definitions. This makes meaningful debate nearly impossible and provides cover for economic exploitation. Take the word capitalism itself. What we have today bears little resemblance to the free enterprise system described by Adam Smith or defended by Milton Friedman. Yet criticism of today's rigged system is dismissed as anti-capitalist, while support for genuine market competition is often labeled socialist if it threatens entrenched interests. The term free trade once meant the absence of tariffs between nations with relatively similar labor standards and environmental regulations. Today, it's used to describe arrangements that allow corporations to arbitrage vast differences in labor costs and regulatory environments while enjoying protected intellectual property rights. A system that is neither free nor trade in any meaningful sense. Public-private partnership sounds collaborative and positive. In practice, it often means privatizing profits while socializing risks and costs, corporations extracting guaranteed returns from taxpayers with minimal accountability. Even democracy has been redefined. We're told we live in a democratic system, yet policies with broad public support, from stricter financial regulation to lower prescription drug prices, fail to become law due to the influence of moneyed interests. Meanwhile, deeply unpopular policies like bank bailouts are implemented with remarkable efficiency. This corruption of language extends to the financial system itself. complex terminology and jargon serve to mystify rather than clarify, making it difficult for ordinary citizens to understand how their economic future is being determined. The solution begins with linguistic clarity, calling things by their proper names. What we have isn't capitalism, but a form of corporatism or financial feudalism. The markets aren't free but heavily managed to benefit insiders, and many of our public servants primarily serve private interests. In our next segment, we'll examine how artificial divisions between Americans have prevented us from uniting against the hijacking of our economic system. The oldest strategy of power is divide and conquer. Keep your subjects fighting each other, and they'll never unite against you. The hijackers of capitalism have mastered this approach, fracturing Americans along every conceivable line except the one that matters most: the division between the connected insiders who write the rules and everyone else who must live under them. Our political discourse focuses relentlessly on cultural issues, race, gender, and partisan identity. These debates consume enormous emotional energy, while economic policies that affect everyone advance with little scrutiny or resistance. Consider how Americans are sorted into opposing political tribes. Conservatives are taught that government is always the problem, never acknowledging how corporate power has captured that government. Progressives are trained to demand more government intervention without recognizing how those interventions often serve entrenched interests rather than ordinary citizens. Rural Americans are pitted against urban dwellers. The working class is divided by race and religion. Generations blame each other for economic conditions none of them created, all while the architects of our economic system continue centralizing wealth and power with remarkably little resistance. This strategy works because the divisions are based on real differences and legitimate concerns, but they're amplified and exploited to prevent the cross-partisan, cross-racial, cross-generational coalition that might effectively challenge the status quo. When was the last time you saw Wall Street bankers and Nebraska farmers coming together to demand policy changes? Or inner-city teachers and suburban small business owners uniting around shared economic interests? These alliances would be powerful, which is precisely why they're discouraged. The media plays a crucial role in this division, focusing on stories that inflame tribal identities while giving minimal coverage to the bipartisan consensus that serves financial and corporate interests. Issues that might unite Americans, like opposition to bailouts or concern about monopoly power, receive fraction of the attention given to culture war flashpoints. True capitalism has always had both champions and critics across the political spectrum. Restoring a functional economic system requires recognizing our common interests beyond partisan labels. In our final segment, we'll discuss what can be done to reclaim capitalism from those who've hijacked it and return economic power to the American people. We've covered a lot of ground today. The hijacking of capitalism represents one of the greatest threats to American freedom and prosperity. But understanding the problem is only the first step. What can be done to reclaim our economic system? First, we need intellectual clarity. The choice isn't between capitalism and socialism, as conventionally defined. It's between a rigged system that serves connected insiders and a truly free market that provides opportunity for all Americans. We must reject false choices and demand a system that combines economic freedom with widespread prosperity. Second, we need to rebuild the institutions that once balanced economic power. Strong families, religious communities, local civic organizations, and labor associations all played crucial roles in ensuring that market forces served human needs rather than the other way around. Third, we must end too big to fail in all its forms. No corporation, bank, or investment firm should be considered essential to the system. Those that become too large should be broken up, not through arbitrary government action, but by removing the subsidies and regulatory advantages that enabled their unhealthy growth. Fourth, we need sound money that serves as an honest measure of value rather than a tool for wealth redistribution. This means ending the Federal Reserve's dual mandate and returning to a monetary system that can't be manipulated for political purposes. Fifth, we must restore the link between production and consumption. An economy where financial engineering is more profitable than actual engineering is fundamentally unsustainable. Tax and regulatory policies should favor those who create real value through innovation and hard work. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, Americans need to recognize their common interests across political, racial, and geographic lines. The division between everyday citizens and the ruling class is far more significant than the divisions we're encouraged to focus on. The task won't be easy. The beneficiaries of the current system will fight to maintain their advantages. They'll use their control over institutions, media, and political processes to resist meaningful change. But throughout our history, Americans have repeatedly risen to challenge entrenched power and demand a system that lives up to our founding ideals of liberty and opportunity for all. We can do so again. The question isn't whether capitalism works, it's whether we'll allow it to work as intended or continue to accept a hijacked version that betrays its core principles. The choice ultimately is ours.